great friend of mine runs another agency. Perhaps we could, have better terms.
We need to save some money.
And when we asked this client that particular question, they said,
tired, stale, jaded, stagnant. I'm not talking about David Indo.
Although I'm feeling all of those things.
These are words we sometimes hear when marketers are kind of justifying why they're taking their media to pitch.
That's right. And we had a client actually come in a week ago. And we always ask clients one question initially when they come in and they're trying to discuss with us the possibility of a pitch is, why are you looking to review your media agency relationships? And when we asked this client that particular question, they said that the relationship was tired and jaded and that it had lost inspiration. And we thought about that and said, is that a reason, a justifiable reason to go to review?
No, certainly isn't. We won't deal with that case specifically, but of course that sounds to us like a relationship that's repairable.
Yes.
And we hear that a lot. And it's not a valid reason to review. We've spoken a lot on Media Snack over the years about the amount of effort and distraction that a pitch creates on both sides, and so there really needs to be a very legitimate reason to do so. Bad reasons, which many of you have probably heard, we need to save some money.
Yeah.
It's not a sole justification for a pitch. It may be a legitimate business imperative, but it's not a reason to pitch.
We've had people come in that have just started a new senior role in marketing and say, I need to stamp my authority. My one big trigger is a media review. That's not often the best reason to go to pitch.
No, exactly. A little run of bad results may create a knee-jerk reaction, blame the agency, change the agency, really not a legitimate reason.
Yeah, and sometimes it's about relationships, great friend of mine runs another agency, perhaps we could, have better terms. That is certainly not the best reason to go to review.
That always ends in disaster. Yeah. We've had a couple of those. The final, there's many reasons, but maybe particularly relevant in the last few years is that categories seem to go kind of pitch together. So, maybe it's a bad idea if you feel like you're missing out, your category's pitching. There always seems to be a straggler who says, but everybody else has pitched, we should kind of pitch as well. That's typically a bad idea, and you're going to get a pretty bad result. So good ideas. We've done a lot of work on this. So what would we consider legitimate reasons to review your media agencies?
Well, if there's been a breach of any kind of contract.
Yes.
So if there's been any legal issue, then obviously that would automatically kind of trigger a legitimate review.
Yeah. Also, competitive conflict, and this is a philosophical one, really, right? Between brands. There's some brands who say, not that bothered actually if my agency is also working with a competitor of mine, but some are absolutely adamant that's not the case, and they write exclusivity clauses into contracts. And when you're talking about media, multinational media. And the requirement perhaps to use one of the 6 global networks for media. Often, conflict is a fact of life. It's just the philosophy of how you deal with it. So for some people, if their agency won a competitive piece of business, that might cause them to review that agency.
That's right. Another thing is consistent poor performance.
Yeah.
If the agency still isn't delivering to the level that you expect them to, and you have provided the right kind of constructive feedback and they're still not delivering, then absolutely you need to perhaps look elsewhere.
And that has to be accountable, right? We talk a lot as well about trying to humanize professional relationships, so encouraging marketers to humanize their agency relationships, and in the same way that if you had somebody who wasn't performing very well in your team, you'd put them on review and kind of help them out of that. The same should be the same for the agency. Saying they're tired is not an accountable metric, unfortunately.
It's not good enough.
So one thing that's come up as well more recently is the change of identity, right? So we've seen it this year with Maxus and MEC being merged into create a new brand, Wavemaker. That's right. That's very good for the majority of clients, but we did hear from a couple of people that said, I'm not sure I like that new thing for their own particular reasons. That's beyond their control, and that triggered them to actually review in that case. I'm not sure whether Wavemaker retained that or not.
But in the same way that kind of the publicist reorganisation to kind of the power of one forced them to kind of look at some of the clients that they had within their agency networks and brace themselves for some repercussions. I think that's just a natural consequence of that. The second thing is business mergers. When two businesses kind of merge together, they perhaps bring to that merger two different agency relationships, then often that triggers a legitimate pitch.
Yeah, and that nearly happened, didn't it, with the Omnicom Publicis merger? That was one of the big questions, was about whether it was going to trigger pitches, kind of either from conflict or anything else. And the final kind of main reason, because we think there are 6 reasons, really, legitimate reasons to call a media pitch, is if there's this change in geographic focus. So a lot of marketing organizations seem to evolve from being kind of much more centralized to very decentralized. And in that shift, as the tide kind of comes in and out, that requires sometimes for you to rethink about your agency requirements, and particularly whether you need a network or local best in class, and that often triggers reviews.
But these are actually growing more and more less common.
We don't hear this.
We don't. I mean, thankfully, right? We don't. What we tend to find now are businesses that have come to us and said, we've reorganized our own internal operating model around media. We've taken more decision making in-house. We've got greater, stronger capabilities around media internally. We understand what drives business growth better through kind of media levers. And what we're looking for is a collection of external partners that better reflects that. Now that's a smarter reason to go to review. Yeah,
exactly. So what we tend to try and do when we get like we did last week, somebody comes in and says, we've got a bit of a challenging relationship with the agency. That's not a legitimate reason to kind of go pitch. And actually, if anything, you're starting halfway through the process. And so what we said in this case, and we would say in every case, is think ahead. You've got to have a strategy for media. Not just change the agency to kind of fix a problem.
That's right.
But that needs to be part of a bigger strategy. The fundamental question, which again we've talked a lot about, we'll link up here to a video we did a little while back now, where we talked about the 5 stages of control, and how advertisers were moving generally from being delegating off control on media to external agencies to now bringing much more and more in-house. That's the trend generally. But you have to develop a strategy for that. And the start point for us, certainly every time, is diagnostic of the client organization, which we call the as-is. So like, where are you right now? And then describe where you want to get to over time. Bring all of your internal stakeholders and sometimes your external agencies as well along with that, so that everyone can be very clear where you're heading. And then a review of your media requirements may well be part of that process.
Yes, that's right.
And maybe should be part of that process. It doesn't mean that's not necessarily a fully blown competitive pitch. It may be working with the existing agency to rethink scope, re-engineer resource, change structure, define processes in a slightly different way.
Mars is a great example of how that process kind of worked. And within that, I think a lot of the questions that are being asked by clients now is about in-housing. And we're going to talk more about in-housing in the future. But understanding what a client's strategy is to starting to bring more disciplines in-house helps inform the way that perhaps that client then goes to market and challenges the agency community to either help or compensate for that kind of requirement ultimately.
Exactly. So it's an interesting time of year, because where are we? We're in September. In our experience, the last 8-9 years doing what we do, this is the time of year, marketing and procurement colleagues getting together, thinking about strategies for next year. It's when the beginnings of these conversations happen. So if you are thinking ahead, thinking about your strategy for media next year, maybe below we can include a little bit of a checklist of some of the things that we've talked about, so you can have a look to see if what you're thinking kind of fits in what we consider to be a legitimate reason to pitch. Right, good week 4.
It's been a very good week for ID Comms. This week we have formally unlocked the next kind of chapter in our kind of strategic geographical expansion.
Indeed. So we are all good to go. We are opening our office in New York as planned. We'll be fully operational by the 1st of November. I am relocating to New York full time, taking some of the team here with me, and we are also recruiting, hiring for great talent in New York. So if you're in New York, give me a call.
Just one question. The one thing that everybody asks here when I talk about New York and you disappearing off to New York is what's going to happen to MediaSnack?
Yeah, I don't know. So we don't know. Nadia will figure something out. It will continue. Yeah, we'll have to just figure out technology. We'll make it happen.
Bad week for?
Bad week for. Well, it's a bad week potentially if you're in the management consultancy business and thinking of getting into the marketing and advertising business, because Mr. Martin Sorrell is back on the map. His new company, S4 Capital, yesterday or this week released a prospectus for potential investors, and they detailed a lot about the strategy for the business. The most interesting thing I think is the narrative coming out of Sir Martin, which is that they are going after management consultants. For many years, having said as CEO of WPP, not a problem, nothing, not a threat to us. He's legitimizing their role in marketing services now.
That's right, and he's designing a proposition that is going to bypass agencies.
Yeah, indeed.
So
good. Okay, we'll keep an eye on that. Right, we're not going to do question of the week because if you watched last week's episode, where our challenge was, should Mark Reed of WPP resign the Ford account, which is kind of a ridiculous question really, but the results are in, and amazingly 50% of viewers said yes, he should. So we don't know who they are.
Was Mark one of those?
Don't know, we haven't heard from him yet. Anyway, that's MediaSnack for this week on that bombshell. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to be alerted of future content. Bye for now.
See you next time.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to do.
Yeah? Oh, yeah. Is that right? Should
Yeah.
do that yawn?
Yeah, let's just do it at the same time.
Yeah. Do I look like I'm shouting, or does that look like a yawn?
No, you look very bored.
Do I look bored?
Yeah. Good. Well done.
Okay.